I hope we're going to have some fun this morning. I'm going to do a little myth busting. You ever watch that TV show, Mythbusters? They take concepts, things that urban myths and legends, and they try to prove whether they're right or wrong. I remember one of the Mythbusters episodes, they proved that the cleanest stall in a public bathroom is the first one nearest the door. And they proved that with their science and stuff. They took on the myths about, are men better map readers? Are men better at grilling than women? And they turned out that both those myths were busted. Women are better map readers. They're better at grilling. But they did discover that men are slightly better drivers. So there are all kinds of myths out there, all kinds of things that sometimes we believe that may or may not be true, like alligators in the sewers in New York City. A myth is something that's generally accepted as being true, even though there may be no concrete proof or rationale to it. And actually, the Bible is full of what I'm going to call myths, things that we believe, things that we teach, things we've been taught that oftentimes turn out not to be exactly right. Sometimes it comes from a mistranslation. Sometimes it comes from a misunderstanding about how something was used, a misunderstanding about their culture. Sometimes the writer's using a Jewish idiom. Boy, those idioms are tough. You try to translate an idiom directly. I remember one time I said to a person that was a French-speaking person, I said something was a piece of cake. I don't think they ever understood what I was talking about. I tried to explain it. They didn't get it. You say things like, well, you're going to keep tabs on somebody. What does that mean? Or he hit the ceiling when I said that. These idioms, things that if you translate it directly and you're not part of that culture, would just kind of seem weird, And that's the way it is with some of the things in the Bible. They're Jewish idioms, and yet the poor translators, when they translated stuff to Greek, they had to translate it literally because they didn't know the idioms. And so some of the stuff just comes out looking weird. Like, for instance, the first myth that I'm going to tackle today is that a clear eye means you understand the Bible, or you understand things of life, truths. Turn to Matthew 6:22 through 23. Matthew 6:22 through 23. Jesus said, the eye is the lamp of the body. Okay, well, immediately you think of the Psalm, right? Your word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my pathway. We're talking about God's word being a lamp. That's what a clear eye must be. It's not. Anyway, he continues, so then, if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? This comes from a Jewish idiom. How many preachers have I heard preach on this, talking about how if you just know the Bible, if you just believe the Bible and understand the Bible, you will have a clear eye, and that's what Jesus was saying. But if you were a Jew, especially in the time of Jesus, and you heard him say something about a clear eye, you would have been certain he was talking about a person who is generous. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the context of this, you'll see that it's all about money. Look at the verses before it, verses 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in to steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Treasure, he's talking about money, right? And so a Jew would have heard him say the next thing is, the eye is the lamp to the body, and if your eye is clear, you are generous. If your eye is not clear, you're not generous with your money and with your treasure. And then let's keep reading on. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. For this reason I say, do not be worried about your life, what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, drink, etc., etc. The whole context of this is money. And so it just makes sense when you understand the idiom. A clear eye is someone who is generous. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to try to pick a myth, show you where it's found, and then try to bust the myth, okay? Like the next myth is, and this has kind of got a couple of different pieces to it. It's a myth about the gates of hell. And the first part of the myth is that hell, the place of eternal punishment, in fire, has gates. And for some reason, we Christians need to storm those gates and break them down and enter into hell. You've heard sermons about this, right? We're going to storm the gates of hell. What are we going to do when we get there? Well, we're going to rush in and find the devil and grab him around the neck. And what is that? The other myth that's in here is that the gates of hell somehow stand in the way of the church or the development or the longevity of the church. So go with me to Matthew 16, 18 through 19. Matthew 16, 18 and 19, where Jesus is talking to Peter here. And he says, you, Peter means little rock or stone, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. So the gates of hell are not going to prevail against the church. And again, if we look at the context of this, it starts with Jesus asking who he is. Peter says in verse 16, you're the Messiah, the Son of God. And Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I say to you that you are a little rock, but upon this rock, this declaration that I am the Messiah, I'm going to build my church. I give you the keys to the kingdom. In the Old Testament especially, anytime keys are mentioned, it's always talking about authority to rule. I give you the keys to my house. It gives you keys to come in. It gives you authority over my house. So the context of this is about authority to rule. So let's start with the first problem here on just how we read this. Now, my translation actually says in verse 18, the gates of Hades will not overpower it. But if you're reading out of the King James or a lot of other translations, it says the gates of hell. And so we normally think of hell as being the fiery place of torment. But when Jesus talked about the fiery place of torment, he didn't use that Greek word Hades there. He used another word. He used the word Gehenna. Go with me to Matthew 5 and 22. Matthew 5, verse 22. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be guilty before the court. But whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, then they'll be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. Now, where it says fiery hell there, the Greek word is actually Gehenna. There in Jerusalem at the time, or just outside of Jerusalem rather, at the time, there was a trash dump. And they burned trash there. It was burning, smoking all the time. And so you'll find in the Gospels, anywhere Jesus referred to the place of eternal torment, he used this word, Gehenna. He didn't use the word Hades. The word Hades is the Greek word which means the place of the dead, or you could use it to refer to the grave. And it's the place of both good and bad dead. In Hebrew, they have a similar word. It's called Sheol, S-H-E-O-L, Psalms 18:5. Let's look at an example of that. Psalms 18, verse 5. This is a prophecy actually about Jesus, and it says, the cords of Sheol surrounded me, the snares of death confronted me. Hebrew poetry doesn't try to rhyme words. What it does is it repeats a phrase or a word a second time in a different way. Like in this case, it says, the cords of Sheol surrounded me, the snares of death confronted me. So we can see that Sheol and death, because of Hebrew poetry, in the writer's mind, were the same thing. And as a matter of fact, if you look up, you do a Google search or whatever you use, you'll discover that word Sheol means the place of the dead, all dead, good and bad, and so you could call it the grave, I guess. Here, let's look at another place in the New Testament where this is used. Luke 16:23. Luke 16:23. Now, if you're reading from the King James, it says, "In hell he, the rich man, lifted up his eyes, being tormented, and he saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom." This is the story of Lazarus and the rich man. But the actual word that's used there is in Hades. He lifted up his eyes. And we get an interesting picture there that the place of the dead, Sheol or Hades, really is kind of divided into two places. One is a place of fiery torment, and the other is a place called the bosom of Abraham here, a place of comfort. Jesus referred to it as paradise when he told the thief, "Today you will be with me in paradise." That's the part of Hades for good folks, okay? So Hades is not the place where the devil lives. It's the place where human spirits go when their bodies die. And that's where I think our spirits get resurrected from, but that's a different study. Look at Acts 2:27. Acts 2 and verse 27. Peter's first sermon about Jesus here, and he's quoting from the psalm that we read, Psalm 18:5. "Because you will not abandon my soul to Hades, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay." Again, your King James might say hell, but the actual word there is Hades. Personally, I just think that when Jesus said what he did there in Matthew 16, I think generally what we see in the Gospels, they weren't speaking Greek. They were speaking Aramaic or Hebrew. But about 150 AD, the Greeks translated those original manuscripts into Greek. And so that's why they would have used the word Hades. But I think Jesus probably used the word Sheol. Anyway, what he's saying is this. He says, "Peter, I'm giving you authority to lead my body, the church, on earth." I'm paraphrasing Coleman, as you would say. "I'm giving you authority to lead my body, the church, on earth, and this authority will not be stopped by the death of you and the other apostles, because you apostles are going to appoint bishops to succeed you." And of course, that's exactly what the early church did. Thus, death, the gates of hell, or the grave, were not going to stop the growth of the church. Does that make sense? I mean, I used to just scratch my head. How are we going to storm the gates of hell, and what are we going to do when we get there? And, well, we're going to go after the devil. Well, just a minute. I don't think the devil's living in hell. I think the devil's alive and well right here on planet Earth, you know. Now, in Revelation 20, it says that the devil's going to get thrown into the fiery pit, the lake of fire, eternal torment. But I don't think he's there right now, okay? So anyway, be careful how you read the word hell in the New Testament. You want to make sure you're reading the right word. Is it talking about the fiery torment, or is it just talking about the place of the dead? The gates of hell, or Sheol, or death, or the grave is not going to stop Jesus from building his church. Okay. Next myth. The Antichrist is talked about in the book of the Revelation. I mean, the mark of the beast, right? That's the Antichrist, right? We know that. The Antichrist is actually not mentioned at all in John's Revelation. There's only 4 uses of that word Antichrist. Antichrist, against the Messiah, against the Anointed One. There's only 4 mentions of that, and they're all in the little books of John. Like 1 John 2:18. 1 John 2:18. "Children, it is the last hour, and just as you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have appeared. From this we know that this is the last hour." Go down to verse 22. "Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Anointed One? This is the Antichrist, or the anti-anointed one, the one who denies the Father and the Son." 1 John 4:3. "And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist." And then one last one, 2 John 1:7. "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who will not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. So the bad guy in the Revelation, in the book itself, is referred to as the beast. Now, he certainly has the spirit of the Antichrist, obviously. And you can call him the Antichrist if you want to. I don't really care. But I'm not going to call him that. I'm going to call him the beast, like the mark of the beast. Okay, last myth that we're going to get to today. The myth is that God is a God of mercy. And y'all have probably heard me talk about this before. But I know you're saying, hold on, that is not a myth. There are all kinds of scriptures all over the Bible that talk about how merciful God is. Well, that's true. The English versions of the Bible call God merciful. But neither the original Hebrew, nor the Greek New Testament refer to God as being merciful. Okay, I know, don't believe me. So first, let's start with a secular definition of mercy. When I say mercy, what do you think of? You think of forgiveness, right? You think of pardon. Somebody that, the woman stands before the judge. Judge, have mercy on me. I got kids at home. You can't throw me in jail. I'm guilty. I deserve the punishment, but I want you to have mercy on me and give me leniency. Mercy could be out of compassion, but it doesn't have to be. What about these guys that, they've been convicted 20 times of something and they're still out on the street causing all kinds of crimes? Those judges didn't give them compassion. They just gave them mercy. So the English word mercy, it'll say compassionate treatment toward an offender or an enemy or somebody that's under your power, or the discretionary power of a judge to pardon or reduce punishment with or without mercy. Look at Ephesians 2 and verse 4. Ephesians 2 and verse 4, where the Bible says, "But God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us. When we were dead in our sin, in mercy, God forgave us." That's how we read that. And so we read the word mercy in the New Testament, and we associate that. The first thing we associate with, but is forgiveness. God forgave us because he is merciful. And that strengthens in our mind this definition of mercy as leniency or clemency or pardon or whatever. I want to start in the Old Testament with the word mercy. Deuteronomy 13:17. Deuteronomy 13:17. God's talking to the people about who they conquer and how they conquer them, what they do afterwards. Nothing from that which is put under the ban. In other words, I'm going to tell you there's a bunch of things. When you conquer somebody, you can't take certain things as spoil. And he says, so don't take anything like that. Don't let it cling to your hand, in order that Yahweh may turn from his burning anger and show mercy to you and have compassion on you and make you increase just as he has sworn to your fathers. So don't take any of the spoils that God has told you not to take, so that God can show mercy and compassion. That's how my Bible reads. Let's look at the original Hebrew words under mercy and under compassion, okay? The Hebrew word translated mercy here is the word racham, R-A-C-H-A-M, and it means compassion or empathy. And this word racham is used throughout the Old Testament, and it's almost always translated as mercy, even though the Hebrew definition is compassion and empathy. It has nothing to do with clemency or forgiveness or pardon. It's only about compassion and empathetic love. I was at the store the other day. I saw an elderly person. I was kind of proud of them for going to the store even, because they were moving with great pain and slowness, and they were going to they were going to shop for themselves. I know what it's like to be disabled, to be in a place where you can't do things that you want to do, where you're really in pain and you're having to really press through that pain to do something that you have to do. And I had empathy for that guy. I felt sorry for him. I didn't have mercy on him. I had this word, racham. I had empathy and compassion for him. And I think translating that word as mercy kind of covers up the real meaning of the word. The second word there, compassion, comes from a similar Greek word. Both the words that are translated mercy and compassion come from the Hebrew word for womb, W-O-M-B. And it implies the love that a mother has for the baby growing in her womb. Matter of fact, one of the words that's translated compassion, actually to a Hebrew, can be used to mean fondle, to hold, to hug. And so when it says here that God's essentially saying, I want you to do the right thing so that I can continue to have empathy and compassion for you. If you take any, again, I'm going to paraphrase. If you take any spoils or booty from this raid, it would make me angry and turn me away from you and against you. So you do what I say, and instead of that burning anger, I will instead have compassion and empathy for you. And that will allow me to feel like lavishing my love on you and wanting to give you a big hug and pour out on you the grace and favor of great increase that I have promised your forefathers. And I'm telling you, the touch is part of that, a loving touch. The love that a mother feels for her baby and loving touch is all part of the context of the Hebrew words that are translated compassion and mercy. So, the English word mercy, that reminds me of an austere father who kind of is aloof and I got the hands full of, well, maybe if you polish my shoes and mow the lawn, maybe I'll let you use the car tonight for the date. Or that's our kind of attitude when we see the word mercy. You don't really deserve it, but I might be nice to you because of what Jesus did. Yeah, that's right. In light of what Jesus did, I'll have mercy on you. But I wouldn't do that otherwise because I really don't like you. But that's not what those words say. Those words say, I have empathy for you. I feel what you feel. And I have compassion for you just like a mother for her baby. And I want to wrap my arms around you and do good things for you. Did that picture get painted here in Deuteronomy with the word mercy? No. Okay, well, let's go back to the New Testament, okay? Surely mercy means mercy in the New Testament, right? I'm telling you, everywhere in the Old Testament you see mercy, you have permission now to retranslate it as empathy and compassion. Okay, let's go to the New Testament. Matthew 9:27. Matthew 9:27. When you understand this verse becomes obvious. As Jesus went from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying out, have mercy on us, Son of David. Have mercy on us? Forgive us? Pardon us? Reduce our sentence? Is that what they're asking for? No, man, they want somebody to heal them. Feel sorry for me and heal me. Well, as it turns out, the Hebrew word translated mercy here and almost everywhere else in the New Testament is the Greek word eleo, E-L-E-E-O. E-I-E-I-O or something. And it means to have compassion or empathy or pity. And as a matter of fact, I love the connotation of the word. It means to have so much empathy and compassion for someone that you are actually driven to do something to help them. And so when you understand that word, okay, that's what those guys are asking for. Lord, have enough compassion and empathy for me to heal me. Okay, that makes sense. How about Romans 9:15? Romans 9, verse 15. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. Okay, he's quoting an Old Testament verse there. He's actually quoting Exodus 33:19. Let's go look at that. Exodus 33:19. And he said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you. I will proclaim the name of Yahweh before you. And I will be gracious to him. I will be gracious. And I will show compassion to whom I will show compassion. Oh, so the Old Testament really is, I'll be gracious to whoever I want to, not merciful, and compassionate on whoever I want to. Well, we already know from studying from what we've learned in the Old Testament that graciousness there, by the way, is a willingness to show favor and grace. And then, of course, we know the word compassion is coming from this word that means the love of a mother for her baby. So in the Old Testament, we see that God says, I'm going to have grace and compassion on whomever I want to. And it doesn't even say mercy in the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, they translated it that way. By the way, again, notice this is Hebrew poetry. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will show compassion for whom I will show compassion. I'm going to say the same thing two different ways. That's poetry. And so that helps us in Bible study. That helps us compare words. So graciousness and compassion are very similar words in the Hebrew mind. So when I go back to Romans 9:15, it is said, I will have empathy and compassion on whom I will have empathy and compassion. And I will have empathy and compassion on whom I will have empathy and compassion. I mean, it's Hebrew poetry there. We read literally that God shows compassion and empathy on whoever he wants to. Fortunately, it's on everybody. Let's go back to Ephesians 2 and 4, and this will make more sense now. Ephesians 2 and 4, Paul wrote, but God being rich in elio, the Greek word elio, which means empathy and compassion, God being rich in empathy and compassion because of his great love with which he has loved us. There's a place in one of the prayers that we pray sometimes, I've changed it for me, because it says, have mercy on us, and for the sake of your Son Jesus, forgive us. It implies that somehow God wouldn't want to forgive me in the first place, but he'll only do it because of what Jesus did. And so in my prayer, I've kind of changed it. Matter of fact, I pray the prayer of forgiveness every day. That's part of my daily devotionals. We've said it this morning, most merciful God, I confess that we have sinned. Well, I don't pray it that way. I pray most empathetic and compassionate God, I confess that we have sinned against you. And when it comes time to forgive us, it's not because of Jesus. It's because he delights in doing that. Because it's your great desire to want to forgive us, Lord. Do that. It's because of his great love with which he has loved us that he shows us empathy and compassion. So God is not a God of mercy, but he is a God of empathy and compassion. And when I ask for forgiveness, I'm not begging for mercy. I'm just reminding God how much he loves me and how much he longs to forgive me. When God forgives me, he makes me innocent. He takes away the charge of any sin. And so when God forgives me, the idea of mercy or leniency or pardon, it's like, well, what would I be pardoned for? I'm not guilty anymore. I mean, we think, well, I'm forgiven, but I'm still an old sinner. No, I'm not an old sinner anymore. I'm innocent. And so why do I need a pardon or leniency? For what? You go into traffic court and the judge says, I'm just going to scratch this speeding ticket as if you never got it. Do you ask the judge for mercy at that point? No, man. You dance out of the courthouse. Woo! Not guilty. Well, anyhow, when you read the Bible now, you can read it differently. Every time you see the word mercy, just retranslate it as empathy and compassion. So there's lots of other myths we could go over, like that there were 3 wise men that came to Jesus, or that Jesus was born in a barn because they didn't have a hotel room for him, or that Jesus was poor, or that God is more concerned about me having the correct doctrine than he is about my relationship with him, or that Christians are born again. That's a myth. Christians are not born again. We're born from above. The Moses seat. What in the world is that? Or Jesus came to fulfill the law. That must mean he came to do away with the law. No, that's not. Lots of myths. We're not going to cover all of them today. Well, I hope you had as much fun listening to that as I had putting it together. And then next time, I'm not going to be here next time, but there's a myth about violent men take the kingdom of God by force. That's a myth. If you go to YouTube in a couple of weeks, you'll see that that's all about something called a poritz or a breaker. And I think there are other things that God uses a poritz for.